So, Mike, how are you? We're looking forward to the first Sunday of Advent, aren't we?
That's right, the beginning of the church's year. So turning over a new leaf.
Are you turning over a new leaf?
Actually, that's a good point. I haven't really thought about it, but I should certainly make some Advent resolutions. So thank you for prompting me. I will consider that duly.
I, I will have to do the same, having raised the subject.
So it's Mark 13, 24 to 37, which when you read it, and I've got it in front of me, it sounds very strange, doesn't it? But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven. Meanwhile, in Scarborough, there'll be light showers and clouds.
So what do you do with that? What do you do with that?
Well, some of the early commentators, people like Jerome said, well, this is about the end of the world. Yeah, this is about the end of the world, and this is what it's talking about. And that's one way of interpreting it. But the trouble with that is, if you look a bit further down the passage, Jesus doesn't seem to concur with that.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, what do you think C.S. Lewis said was the most embarrassing verse in the whole of the New Testament?
I don't know, but I suspect it's somewhere in this passage.
Very good. It is. The most embarrassing verse, he said, is, "Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things come to pass."
Yeah.
Because C.S. Lewis was clearly reading it as an end of the world kind of passage with this rather embarrassing statement of Jesus in the middle. Yeah. But in fact, if you follow somebody like, so the first view is it's the end of the world, which I don't think is credible given what Jesus just said. The second view is Tom Wright's view, which is actually, this is all about the destruction of the temple and the coming of the Son of Man in authority. And as Tom Wright points out, this is not about the Son of Man coming at the end of time. And there's nowhere is the parousia, the coming of the Son of Man at the end of time, mentioned. But it echoes Daniel, which says it's the Son of Man coming to the Ancient of Days, coming to the God of Israel, and being vindicated by the God of Israel in resurrection, but fulfilling the vocation of the people of Israel. So he says it's all about the destruction of the temple. And often you would find that earthly events of shattering significance would be depicted in this, what they call apocalyptic way. Mm-hmm. So that's the second view.
Yeah.
And the third view is a kind of riff on that. People like Dick France and Ian Paul would say, well, they say right is right up to a point, but they reckon that after you get to verse 32, when Jesus then says, but about that day or hour no one knows, then they reckon it's no longer about the temple, but actually it's about the return of the Son of Man at the end of time, because they make out that the Greek is such a sudden kind of like emphatic but about that time that it changes. I'm not convinced by that. I'm with Wright on this, the second one. And I think the language of the sun being darkened and the moon not giving its light, that echoes the prophet Isaiah, who uses that kind of language to talk about the fall of empires and the reign of justice, but the shattering also of different kinds of hopes. So I think really it's about the destruction of the temple.
So what do you do with that last bit when he says you don't know what time it's going to be, if you don't think it's about the parousia?
Well, because they don't know when these shattering events are going to take place in Jerusalem. But as sure as eggs, they are inevitable given the way the people are and how the people are going, both in their provocation of the Babylonian Empire, or the Rome as it was, and in terms of their refusal to center themselves around the teachings and the way of Jesus. So that's how I'd kind of read it. How would you read it?
So, well, I'm struck, first of all, chapter 13, it's sort of plonked in the middle, isn't it? Between 12 and 14. You can happily read 12 to 14 without 13. It doesn't sort of, so it really is an interruption. So there's something for me about this, about interruption. There's something about impending calamity, whatever the meaning of that impending calamity is. And I noticed something I was looking at was saying that the sun darkening and the moon, the sun and the moon darkening was could be seen as a return to the chaos before the creation of the sun and the moon. So it was a returning to returning to a point from which the world could be born again. And so that that's where I think you might get something about the Parousia in, because this is the fulfillment of that which was at the beginning. The other thing that struck me though was that we have these passages. It draws massively on Daniel. And in every generation, every decade, I would imagine, there is this sense that the world is going to end for some reason or another. So we as humans, we seem to live in that sort of time frame, or with that kind of looming darkness over us. And right now we're living in this very peculiar time where we're hoping that it won't end, because we're hoping we'll get through this particular bit. But then we've got the climate crisis, and it may end because of that. And 30 years ago, it was nuclear destruction. So we have this propensity for expecting the world to end, or thinking it might. And that might be at a very personal level. It might be at a kind of more global level. And for me, so and whether anticipating the fall of Jerusalem, or whether the fall has happened at the point at which Mark's writing, you are picking up that same tendency that something, the world is, we're all going to rack and ruin. And so the call in that time, in this time, in any time, is to be faithful and trust in a God who is Lord of history. And that's how I try and make sense of what is otherwise can be quite a perplexing passage.
And it's even more perplexing when you take that last bit about the master going away and leaving the servants, and the warning is to be prepared and alert, for we don't know when the master is coming back. And if we take that as a metaphor, that kind of fits very neatly into an understanding of Advent, doesn't it? As Advent is the time between two Advents, the advent of Jesus at Christmas and the advent of the coming of the Son of Man in judgment at the end of time. And in the meantime, we are to watch and look out for signs and stuff. But it doesn't quite fit, does it? Because actually the master has gone away, and the master isn't there. So in a sense, there is no sign of the presence. And yet we know from elsewhere in the Gospels, lo, I am with you always, even to the close of the age. So it's kind of awkward, isn't it? As a whole passage, it doesn't quite fit neatly any theory of ours that we've got.
But if you place this, if you think Mark's Gospel was written at around slightly after the fall of Jerusalem, if you see it as written in Rome, so at a time of great persecution, then there is a huge amount of uncertainty around. So it's echoing that uncertainty, and you can imagine Jesus saying all of these things, but then being picked up and interpreted again through that lens of uncertainty, and the call continues to be, how do we live through this time? And we live through this time not knowing when anything is going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know when Jesus is going to return. We don't know any of this. So we stay faithful. That's what we need to be doing.
Yeah. The darkness of the world and the faith of the early church and the confidence in the final hope. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.